introduce the speaker today because the speaker is qualified and speaking about very interesting topics and is also my father. So he is, so it's strange for me to refer to him anything other than dad, but when he's talking to people that aren't his children, he calls himself Paul Rosenberg, and he's going to be talking to us today about the cypherpunk history of Bitcoin, which is really quite cool. So Paul has been involved in cryptography projects since the 90s, and I don't have any clue what those projects were, although I'm sure that's accurate. I have many childhood memories of him just sitting in front of a computer yelling and concerned about something or another, so I'm sure some of that was cryptography based. But he's still very involved in cryptography. He is the co-founder of a very serious VPN service with a very amusing name, Cryptohippie. That is them right there. So he runs that. He also does quite a lot of writing, from technical writing and sort of a past career in electronics and fiber optics to now running a newsletter, which is the Freeman's Perspective. Is that freemansperspective.com?
It is.
Cool. He's also written a number of books, including A Lodging of Wayfaring Men, Production Versus Plunder, and The Breaking Dawn. Did you want to plug the new one?
It isn't.
The Breaking Dawn? Not the other one? Okay. So in that time, he's also followed along with the development of Bitcoin and been involved with the Bitcoin community. I think spoken at a number of Bitcoin conferences. So we're quite happy to have him here today. So please welcome my dad, Paul Rosenberg.
All right, I left the Cryptohippie tag on there because really, when you're talking about the cypherpunks, it really kind of begins with the hippies. I'm going to, for just a couple of minutes, talk about my experiences back in the 1970s, late 60s. I wasn't quite old enough to be in the action. But the 70s, I remember, and I want to explain to you a little bit what it was like, so you get a little flavor of the beginning of this thing. Everybody's experiences of the 70s, whoever lived through them, they're all different. Everybody had a different experience. So I'm telling you mine. Somebody else's may differ. Okay? The 60s were a very interesting time. Things broke apart for a variety of reasons. It's a long talk of its own. But things broke apart, and the old culture was seen as old and boring and closed in and locked in, and people wanted to break out of it. In the 70s, we wanted to be new, we wanted to be different, we wanted to be better. I was something of a musician and involved with a lot of musicians. We would not listen to, let's say, Frank Sinatra. We wouldn't listen to Elvis. Nothing wrong with them, they're both good singers. But we wanted to be new, we wanted to be different, we wanted to do something better. And this was what was going on at the time and was in the head of everyone I knew. I'll give you an example. When you would meet somebody new for the first time, you would say, "Hi, what are you into?" And people would define their own selves by things that they were interested in, that they chose, that they cared about, and that they spent time. Somebody might be interested in NASA. We had NASA geeks, we had objectivists, we had free lovers, we had Jesus people, we had everything. And people cared about them. They studied, they learned, they developed, and they were going to do it not only as good as what went before, but they were going to extend it and be better than anything went before. We were agents of the future. And this is where it begins. Whoever's running the thing, next one, please. Just for cutes, I'll show you a little quote here from one of my. Can everyone? I'll read it to you. If they had tried to offer my generation music from someone that won a game show, you would have been laughed out of the room. Nothing against the people on the game show. Some of them are fine musicians, but this is the way it was in the 70s. Corporate was not what we did. We were escaping from the corporate culture where everybody does the same thing and obeys and keeps the rules. We wanted out of that. So this is the mindset that was behind it. Next, please. This is one of the places it began. Can we raise that up at all? There you go. This is a magazine called 2600. Anybody ever heard of 2600? Oh, we got a few. 2600 were phone hackers. Okay, the phone system back in the 60s and the 70s was a big deal. And somebody found out that if you put a tone at 2600 hertz, then that would open up the phone system to commands. And they were worked on various types of signals. And it just so happened that there was, I'm getting really arcane here, there was a whistle that came in a Captain Crunch box that went at exactly 2600 hertz. And so, of course, one of the most famous hackers called himself Captain Crunch. But this is where it began, and people were doing this. Next, please. See if you recognize these guys. That's Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. They are not making a computer then. They're making a blue box. A blue box was how you hacked the phone system. A blue box gave you the 2600 tone and had some of the other tones built in, like the tones on the push button phones. They're a mixture of different frequencies. This is what they were building. This is what they were selling. It was, I don't think there was a particular law against it, but it was, not really kosher. And this is what they were doing. This is what interesting people were doing at the time. Next. This is the guy who really started off the cypherpunks. I'm sorry about the quality. That's the best I've got. A man named David Chaum. David Chaum was a very bright young cryptographer back in the 80s when cryptography was a munition. Okay? Cryptography, cryptographic programs were classified by the United States government as a weapon and were treated as weapons. So he was one of the young guys who was working on this stuff, and he says, whoa, 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 we can do some really, really interesting stuff here. And he, on his own, began to do it. Next, please. One of the things he did was he figured out how to make cryptographically secure mixes. So you could take, in this case, four different signals, or four different, let's call them emails, and mix them back and forth through, we call it a mix master. And they would thereby anonymize them so no one would know where it came from. If the message is encrypted, and if you can't tell where it came from, then you have protection. Okay, you really need both. Encryption is wonderful, but if they know who talked to who, when, and how often, and so on, they still kind of got you. So he figured out how to do this mix master thing and to also keep it cryptographically secure back in the 80s. Next. He also made electronic cash. This story's from a little bit of a later date, but he made something called digital cash, and he figured out how to make it so it, again, had blind signatures, so you could tell that this bearer certificate, this coin, was good, but you didn't know who the other party was. And you could tell it. So this was a very important development. So Dave Chaum really is kind of the guy who's the granddaddy of the technology. Next, please. The first war was with PGP. We call it the first crypto war. And it was in, gosh, I'm not sure, 1990, 91, 92. What happened was, as I say, cryptography was considered a munition, a weapon. And it was quite illegal to get it outside of the United States. Well, some of these guys thought, that's crazy, we should have privacy, and everyone should have privacy. So what they did is, one of the young cryptographers was a guy named Phil Zimmerman, and he wrote a program called Pretty Good Privacy. We call it PGP. And what they did is they said, wait a minute, we still got the First Amendment, and we can print a book. So what they did is they printed the whole program, and they wrote the program and put it into a book and bounded it as a book and printed it and then mailed it to their friends in Europe. And the friends in Europe took it and turned it back into a program, and now the whole world has PGP. And of course they tried to put Phil Zimmerman into jail and a few other things. It was close, but he didn't have to go, and now we all have PGP. It was a big, big deal at the time. I actually know some of the people on the other side who were typing it in to turn it back into a program. They were teenagers who were involved in it. Yeah. Next, please. Okay, so once we have this, we've got anonymizing technology with these mixes, and we've got cryptography that everyone can have. We realize we've got Terra Nova. We have a new world that we can wall off. And we can build our own new world, unlike the old world. We can actually do this. And we can't physically deliver parcels, but we can have identity, we can have money, we can have communications, we can have a whole lot of our lives on this thing, and it's the world as we want to make it, not as it's thrust at us. So we had this guy, Timothy C. May was the guy who wrote this. He was, actually at the time, he was chief scientist for Intel. Very, very, technically skilled, very bright guy. And he and his friends, Eric Hughes and others, were putting this thing together, saying, oh my God, what can we do with this? We can do this, we can do this, and they were putting all these ideas together. Out sweetest, he says transactions in this world can only be voluntary, since the parties are untraceable and anybody can withdraw at any time. This has profound implications against use of threat by force. In particular, threats of force will fail. When you can't know who it is, when you can't tell what they're doing, force doesn't matter anymore. That's a very, very big deal. And he says what emerges from this is unclear, but I think it'll be a form of anarcho-capitalist market system that I call crypto-anarchy. And that's where this began. And it was intoxicating. I mean, creating a new world. I mean, that's what started the American Revolution. If anybody remembers Tom Paine, he says, we have it in our power to create the world over again. And this is what cypherpunks were about. Next, please. This is one of the guys who happened to be a lyric writer for the Grateful Dead. Wrote a thing called the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace. And this is the part of it that I like. It says, governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace, the new home of the mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome amongst us. You have no sovereignty where we gather. This is the idea. We were going to create the world again as we think it should be. And there were all kinds of discussions of how should the world really be? What's the moral way to set up a human civilization? What is right, what is wrong? Really interesting discussions. And there were people who took it upon themselves to create the world anew. That's a really cool thing to do. We had a financial cryptography conference that used to run every year in Anguilla, okay, a little island in the Caribbean. It was considered kind of a safe place to hold a financial cryptography conference. Next, we had people who were trying to start, or did have a data haven on an abandoned anti-aircraft platform off of London. And they lived out there for a while. And they had a really good data haven there. It had to close down for another long story. But it was there for a while, and they hosted things like Free Tibet, and all kinds of really cool stuff. Of course, the Pirate Party had their servers there. They weren't called the Pirate Party. Next, please. This was an interesting one. We had some guys that were, Ayn Rand aficionados, and they had in their head that they were going to bribe the president of, I'll leave the country's name off, South America, and they were going to bribe him, I don't remember what the amount was, $1 million or something, and he was going to give them so many square miles of land, and they could set up their own country and do anything they wanted. And they were going to get everybody to get involved. This ad ran in The Economist. If anybody knows what The Economist is, it's a kind of very fancy magazine. And a lot of people signed up. Obviously, it didn't work because the politician never came through on his promise. Next, please. But this guy, Orland Gravy, convinced them to turn it into a cypherpunk project. They already had a headquarters in Costa Rica, which wasn't the country with the land sale. They had this really cool headquarters in Costa Rica, and we said, let's make this into a cypherpunk project. We've got cryptography, we've got anonymity. We can do these things, we can create the world anew. So these guys, this was a big project. There was hundreds of people that put up a lot of money to make this thing go. And, I could tell you a lot about Orland. The thing begins late one night while sharing a pharmacological product with a spook I met. I mentioned I was studying cryptology, which is what we called it sometimes, and on and on and on. But this Orland did a lot of fundamental work as well on this stuff. He was a very bright guy. He's passed away since. Next, please. One of the things we had was called DMT, the Digital Monetary Trust. You had digital bearer certificates, which are digital coins. And you could transfer them in any of, I think, 6 different currencies. We had bank accounts where you could send international wires. You could buy and sell stocks. For a while you could buy and sell options, all with encrypted, anonymous digital currency. And it was very, very cool. This is 2002, somewhere around there. People were doing really good work. Next, please. At the same time, we came along e-gold. Does anyone remember e-gold? Okay. E-gold was cool. It was gold held in a warehouse, and you could buy a certain number of grams of it that you owned, and you could trade with your friends. So if you had 50 grams of e-gold and you owed your friend in, I don't know, Luxembourg, $100, you can just send them some e-gold rather than sending a bank wire, which takes a week, is insulting, and costs, by the way, $100 on top of the money you send. So it was wonderful stuff. Next, please. Somebody, a programmer in Great Britain, built something called 1MDC, which was an anonymous overlay that went over the top of e-gold. So you could use e-gold anonymously. And all of these things worked very well, and they were run honestly, honorably, for quite a period of time. Next, please. We had another one called Pecunix, which was really a very good digital gold. Next, please. Here's what we had that was interesting. We had a whole network of exchangers. I'm not sure how many, but there were dozens at one time or another that were exchangers. And these were guys who would travel around and open up a bank account in whatever country they went to, and they would exchange e-gold or Pecunix or a couple others that we had at the time for whatever national currency you had. And there was a whole network of them, complete with all of the back channels where they would say to each other, hey, I need $500 worth of e-gold. Who's got it? Oh, here you go. I'll trade you some whatever. PayPal was early in those days. And they had a whole infrastructure of all this stuff. Next, please. We wrote papers. This was a paper that was, I guess I'd call it, it was about the mathematic and economic foundations of a digital economy. It's a fairly long paper. We built systems of law. This was, how do you enforce contracts in a place where no one knows who the other one is? Anonymity or pseudonymity. How do you do it? Well, we developed ways and built our own set of laws. And we had arbitration and everything else built to make this thing work. We had an escrow service. So if you wanted to buy and sell with somebody, you send your money to the escrow. If you didn't know them, you didn't trust them, and we do it that way. Please. Then came the feds. Let me read this to you. Crime courses through the internet in an ever-expanding variety. Hackers brazenly hawk stolen bank and credit card information. Pornographers peddle pictures of little boys and girls. Money launderers make illicit cash disappear in the maze of online accounts. Diverse as they are, many of these cyber criminals have something important in common. Ego limited. Okay, this is when you knew, it was going to get rough. Okay. But e-gold was run honorably. We know, people used to say in those days, oh, come on, please. You're going to send them actual money? You think they really have the gold? What kind of sucker are you? Well, we know now that they had the gold because the feds gave receipts for it. So all the gold was there. E-gold was run by a doctor, an oncologist in Florida, who realized that gold was real money and the stuff they put out that wasn't, and everything else was manipulated and gold wasn't, so we thought it would be a really good idea to give people real money that couldn't be manipulated. Good idea in my eyes. He just barely avoided going to jail, just barely. But till the time they came and got him, some of us were saying, his name was Doug, please, leave Florida. You've got some money, go live in, wherever, somewhere in France or in Italy or Japan or somewhere. because they're going to get you, man. You know, they're going to get you. Oh, no, he says, you don't understand. I'm giving seminars at the Department of Justice telling them how to catch bad guys on the internet. Yeah, they're my friends, don't worry about it. Well, boom. And he just about went to jail. Next, please. Bernie von Nothaus, who was a quirky grandpa, did the same thing. Interesting guy. He designed beautiful coins. That was his job. He was an engraver for, I don't know if it was the National Mint or one of the state mints, whatever. He was a professional engraver, made beautiful coins. But the feds got him because he didn't have the right wording on his 1 ounce silver rounds. Not coins, rounds. Anyhow, next please. So they came after a lot of people, but it didn't stop. Ignore that part. This is VoucherSafe, which is a really cool digital currency that still exists. It runs over chat systems. So you send chat messages to your friends, and that is actually spending your money. Very cool system. We had Loom. Anybody know Loom? Loom is, how do I describe Loom? Imagine safe deposit boxes that you can only get into if you have the right code. That's what Loom is. Now, the cool thing about Loom is the safe deposit boxes don't have locks. You can just, if you got the code, you can get whatever's in it. The interesting thing about it is, there are so many Loom boxes that there are more Loom boxes than there are molecules in the known universe. So good luck trying to find which one to raid. It's just got a completely different, very cool model. Some really smart guy named Patrick Chikora put this together and thought it was really cool and put it out. And it's still there, you can use it. Next please. eCash, which is probably the best of the digital currencies from a cryptography standpoint. This was, their original showing their backing, and they had really cool audit procedures and everything else. It's really not used very much anymore, but it still exists and it's really good stuff. Next, please. These are the most famous cypherpunk groups. Okay. WikiLeaks. They're a group of cypherpunks out of Melbourne, Australia. And they were reading Rothbard and all sorts of things and decided that this was the way that they could change the world and put honesty back in human affairs. To make it summarize briefly. Next. And of course the most famous cypherpunk probably these days is Julian Assange. Okay. Next please. Somebody named Fellow Traveler built this system that you can be your own bank with cryptologically secure and using servers that you don't even trust. And you can make your own contracts. You can make your own futures option contracts. You can do all kinds of things like that. Next, please. And then we come to Bitcoin, which came out of the Cypherpunks mailing list. In 1998, I think it was, a guy named Wen Dai, however it's properly pronounced. Guys just made up these names. Put together a paper that described Bitcoin. I mean, they didn't call it Bitcoin, but this is how you could secure transactions on a network and make sure that the transactions are, eliminate the double spend problem. This was done in 98, and then in 2008, best anyone could tell, some person or persons took time off and spent a year coding Bitcoin. And they obviously had skill, and they coded Bitcoin, called the lone coder. It could have been 2 or 3, not just one. But they made Bitcoin and then put it out to the world. Next, please. Then, of course, came Silk Road, which was very interesting. I like the concept. I'm not a drug guy, so, that part of it didn't turn me on. But it was a real interesting application of the combination of cryptography, anonymity, and commerce. And it worked really, really, really well. And it provided, like I said, I'm not a drug guy, but let's say if I were, I would rather buy from rated sellers on the internet than to try to buy it from some really scared guy in a dark street corner somewhere. Which is worse? So, anyhow, this worked very well. There were problems with security, there were problems with overtrust in Tor. Next please. But now we have Open Bazaar, which does the same thing in a decentralized way, so there's no central headquarters to raid and grab. It's all decent. And the new build of OpenBazaar, I'm told, is really, really good. I haven't seen it myself. Next, please. Now we have Ethereum, which I think most people in here know about, automated contracts. Actually built on the work of one of the guys from the list in the old days, a guy named Nick Szabo, who really did the underlying work on this back in the 90s. Next, please. Here's what's something cool. This is the cool place that I like to go when I can. It's the Institute of Crypto Anarchy in Prague. Really cool place. They have a conference every October. Highly recommend it. A lot of fun. Really cool people. So this is pretty much where we are to date, and it's been a really interesting journey. I mean, I have so many stories, I could be here for days. Really interesting people, but the core of it is rebuilding the world in the way we think is right. Last slide, please. And this, I'll read this to you. This is from Bucky Fuller, who was the sage of the 1970s. And says, the youth of humanity are intuitively revolting from all sovereignties and political ideologies, and shall lead society to its happy egress from the misconceived, fear-based, and legally imposed customs of yesterday. Traditional human power structures in their reign of darkness are about to be rendered obsolete. And that's what Cypherpunks is about. That's the roots of Bitcoin. Thank you very much. Questions? Okay. Anything? One start, please.
You talk about the 70s and how the whole idea behind that was you wanted to be different and better than what came before.
Right.
In the 90s with the Cypherpunks, they were also sort of intermingled with a group called the Extropians that were also about like life extension and cybernetics and empowering humans in a technological way.
Correct.
Versus a social way in the 70s. So can you talk a little bit about the intermingling of that sort of thing? It also has to do with what is the concept of the unitarian?
Transhumanism.
Thank you. Transhumanism. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Sure. The Extropians were very, very interesting guys. There's people still doing it. Usually they call themselves biohackers these days. And what they wanted to do was make humanity physically better. How can we hack the human body and make it better? There are all kinds of ideas. First of all, taking vitamins and giving yourself shots of whatever. And these are really bright guys, and they're still doing it. The thing that is really hot now is something called CRISPR. That's a whole nother subject of its own, but it's genetic editing. This kind of stuff scares people because, you're going to change the human body. I mean, some of these guys want to have implants, and there's guys working on, brain implants so you can upload, Wikipedia or something, and, and a chip in your brain. This is very odd for most people. And, I mean, I'm not planning on doing it myself, but it's very, very interesting because what it does, if, let's say, they can actually do the things they want to do, we're kind of taking control of our own evolution. That's a very powerful thing. And it's a little frightening given the philosophical background that all of us grew up in. That, this isn't done, this happens whenever. Either we evolve in 10 gajillion years, or we go to heaven and then we're fixed automatically, or whatever it is, it's not something we do ourselves. Thou shalt not do that. And it freaks people out. So the Extropians were guys who got over that and said, we want to be able to do this, we want to fix ourselves, we want to improve ourselves. And there were a lot of cypherpunks that were also Extropians. One of the guys who built the data haven on the anti-aircraft platform was an Extropian. So there were a lot of interplay between these groups, and I tell you, from an intellectual standpoint, it was a gas, man. There were really interesting ideas, and people not just blathering about it, but actually doing it. There are biohackers now who do all sorts of things. They developed, I know one group was developing night vision eye drops. Okay, so you put in the eye drops and then you can see at night. I mean, see, you know, in near darkness. And all kinds of, these are really interesting people doing really interesting things. And one of the core things behind it is they're not asking for permission. They're not petitioning somebody to make it legal. They're not petitioning somebody to give them funding, and that they're just going out and doing it in garages and in, you know, basements and in whatever. They're just doing it, and that to me is exciting. Another question, please.
Two questions. One is, you know, so, you know, being relatively new to Bitcoin, we think that this line, this date of December 2008 when the white paper was written. So I really appreciate your historical perspective. But like, what do you see? So the first question is, what do you see in the next 5 or 10 years with where we're going, based on what you've done in the past? I mean, just anything close. And secondly, you really can't come to this space without being a bit of a contrarian, a bit of a rebellion. You've got to be like kind of an in-your-face talk. Okay, so did Hannah listen to Frank Sinatra and Elvis to get back at you, or did she follow in with Led Zeppelin and something that was going on back in the 70s?
Let me put it this way. Hannah was always her own person, even when she was tiny. So I may have, you know, helped a little bit, and hopefully I, you know, fed her
Fan the embers of...
hopefully I gave her what she needed. But Hannah was, what the heck, I'll tell a story about it.
No, I didn't want to embarrass you. I was just throwing a joke out there.
It's a cool story. It's a cool story. She was little, 2 years old, maybe 3. And I woke up one morning and I, you know, bleary-eyed, and I walk into the kitchen, and there's the kid who pulled a chair up to the counter and climbed up, and she's looking at the toaster. You know, it's one of those metal toasters that he's you know, a little kind of a mirror finish, and she's going like this, and looking around, and I'm thinking, she's looking at a reflection, you know, going like this. Okay, well, it's, you know, yeah, that's kind of, you know, a little kid thing to do. Okay. And then she sees me, she says, Dad, she says, I figured out how this works. There's a piece down here that you pull down, and then it moves a piece over here that I can see the edge of it. Then there's another piece inside, I can't see it, but I know it has to be there because when it goes down, it locks that thing in place. I'm going, oh, this is interesting. So Hannah really didn't need my help, but hopefully I provided some. The future of Bitcoin is really interesting because there's all these factors that come into play at the same time. First of all, we have the big banks and the Fed and the central banks and all of these people who have to hate it because it's a different model. It's a complete escape from their monopoly. So they have to hate it, and of course they do. But on the other hand, they kind of need something like it because the credit card system is massively overcomplicated, massively expensive, massively slow and difficult. And if they can build a kind of a blockchain sort of thing, all of a sudden it becomes cheap and not necessarily super duper fast because, you know, blockchain transactions take a little bit of time, but a whole lot better than the, you know, day or two that they do now. So they kind of need that for some of their back end things. At the same time, they can't allow Bitcoin ultimately to succeed because they're out of business. And at the same time, those guys and their friends own the cables and the routers, which is kind of important here. So it's a real mix, and you know, I love Bitcoin. I want it to succeed. It will succeed in one way or the other. But there could be some bumps in the road as time goes on. You know, we just don't know. But the awesome thing about Bitcoin is that there are 10, 20, 30, I don't know how many thousand people who get up every day and say, I want to turn this into something awesome. That can't be easily stopped. That's a big deal. Anything else? Please.
Yeah, what do you think the risks are for cryptography and privacy being regulated, you know, given like that issue where they had the FBI trying to get Apple to unlock that iPhone. And,
right.
I mean, they got around it, but maybe in the future they won't be able to get around it, and they're going to push legislation through.
Right. Well, here's what's going on with cryptography and the large governments. is that they've already undermined a lot of it. Not legally, see, laws are slow. So they've kind of given up on the legal route, at least partly, because they're slow. I mean, you've got to get the right congressman, you got to get the right committee, you got to get draft the legislation, you got to convince 100 and some guys to vote for it, and it's slow and it's difficult, and there are legal challenges and everything else. It's much better if you can just, behind the scenes almost, talk to this guy and say, look, we need you to do this. And so that's exactly what the NSA has been doing. You can find it in some of the Snowden slides, and there are people who can tell you that they've had the talk, where, guys show up, you're one really tough-looking guy who kind of stares at you the whole time, and another one who says, oh, we know you're a good patriot, and you want to do this. We want you to weaken your hash for creating the cryptographic key. And like I say, it's in the Snowden documents, and they've been doing this for some time. So that's kind of the route they're going on. They would have to go pretty hard after GPG or things like that. Cryptography is just math. It's really hard to outlaw math. Even if you get rid of one of them, somebody else can just, multiply prime numbers too. It's more complicated than that, but there are a lot of people who are good at that type of thing who can do it. So it's really hard for them to do that. I don't see that as being a primary focus of theirs. I certainly hope not. Anything else? Going once? Yes, sir.
So a lot of the goals of the cypherpunks were not necessarily digital cash. I mean, digital cash was one, but
Right.
there were several others, like you touched on briefly: data havens, encrypted messaging, reputation markets, things like that.
Yes.
Some of those have come to fruition along with Bitcoin, like data havens now may be like a BitTorrent, like a distributed, not a platform in the middle of the ocean that can be attacked or something
Right.
like that. What other things do you think have come to fruition, or maybe will come to fruition, out of the cypherpunk movement in the coming decade?
I'm really not sure off the top of my head. What really matters is this ability to create a terra nova, to create a world in which everything is voluntary, which if you don't want to play, you don't have to play. And that's really the goal. Open Bazaar is one of the big things that came from it. The things that are still missing in that world are, first of all, people understanding that they can actually protect themselves on the internet. Encryption is cheap. Even if you use a service like mine that does all kinds of fancy things, it's less than $1 a day. You can get a basic encryption program for free, and it works. They can't break it. It works really well. So people need to understand that they can do this, that they can use it, that they really can protect themselves from it. Because right now a lot of people, they see the threats and they don't really want to think about it. It's too scary, it's too complicated, it's easier just to kind of ignore it and pull out and swipe your iPhone a few times. People need to know that they can do this. This is really one of the things that we really need for that knowledge to be spread. But there's not too much else. If we get all the things that we already have operating, we need physical delivery, which drones work really well for that. Okay, drones, you can deliver whatever you want, wherever you want. And there are a lot of guys hacking away on drones right now. Parallel institutions, parallel paths for things that don't entail coercion. Those are the things we're looking for. Any others?
Quick follow-up
Sure.
also. Something that's really interesting in the blockchain Bitcoin space is people working on digital identity, right? I think that's interesting because cypherpunk vision is you don't want a digital identity, you want anonymity, so no one can come after you.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think the tension? What do you think about the tension between those two things?
I think pseudonymity. So a name, I am Captain Crunch, is a really useful thing for business because you have to establish some kind of reputation. And you want it to be tied not to just nobody air. You want it to be tied. I mean, look, if I do business and I do honest business with people, I want my reputation. That matters. That's worth something. So with pseudonymity, if I'm Captain Crunch, then I can build reputation with that identity. So I'm a real fan of pseudonymity. So everyone has a name, it's protected, it's cryptologically secure, and I want my reputation. I want reputation systems. We used to call them web of trust, whatever. eBay has them, Amazon has them. There's different ways to do them. But I want that because I'm doing honest business and I want people to know that they can trust me. So I'm in favor of pseudonymity. Anonymity's fine. I may want to use that once in a while, but for real daily life, I want a pseudonym because trust can attach. Sir?
Yes, I have a question regarding, for some of us that are new to investing in Bitcoin, can you please describe the security measures that we should consider taking when, let's say, moving a considerable amount of money from dollars to BTC, and is it safe to actually use these apps like Coinbase and others?
For security, Coinbase is not acceptable. I mean, it works. There's nothing wrong with the system for what it is. But if you want to protect your privacy, you really can't use them. If you really want to protect your privacy, you take Bitcoin in a business that's not tied to you personally, or you do local Bitcoins and meet somebody at the Starbucks and buy and sell your Bitcoins.
Yeah.
The method of staying secure with Bitcoin, the important part is exchanging the addresses. That's the really critical part. Because if you use the same address time and again, then it can be traced. Bitcoin is, by itself, is completely transparent. I mean, blockchain is there forever. The record is there forever. So if you use a different address every time with everyone you go to, things can be traced back to you, and it's to the same wallet, and it's easy to figure out who's who. So what you want to do is exchange the addresses securely. That's an entire problem with cryptography. Really, the weak link in cryptography is exchanging keys. That's the tricky part. So you exchange the addresses in encrypted emails, or encrypted in anonymous emails, or even better, or in person, or in some way that doesn't leave a trail that says this is this guy. So encrypted emails are usually the easiest.
And store them where if you're not using an app for, let's say?
Well, you would just take the address right out of your wallet. You're saying I want to receive. Here's an address for you to send to.
Right. So if you're not recommending Coinbase, which wallet would you suggest?
Oh, there are a variety of wallets that are pretty good. I don't know the mobile wallets very well myself.
Would you suggest like a PC-based?
That's what I prefer.
I would talk to Brooke about Trezor, or hardware.
Oh, Trezor is good. Trezor is real good. Yeah.
I'll talk to him.
They're good.
Yeah.
Yeah, Trezor is a real. She can tell you the details about that. Trezor is quite good. It's a hardware wallet. But the original. The Bitcoin, what do they call it now? Bitcoin QT or Bitcoin, whatever the original program is. The modernized version is quite good. Electrum is a good wallet. It's easy. It's web-based. It's a tiny little program. You're not downloading the whole blockchain. And there's a variety of others.
I'm sorry. Please repeat that.
Electrum.
Electron.
TRUM.
TRUM. It's real easy.
Yeah.
And you can keep your own keys, and you can even create a we used to call it a mind wallet. I don't know if they still call it that, where you remember 12 words and you can always recover your wallet at any time. Yeah, you can do that. So
I think the bigger distinction is you want to have control of your private keys. If a third party has control of your private keys, you're not much different than the old banking system where you're trusting.
Like Mt. Gox.
Yeah, you're trusting someone else.
Yeah.
So with a hardware wallet or paper wallet in a safe, something like that, where you have the keys, that's more secure.
thank you. That's the important point. Yeah. Anything else? Please.
Probably not a very professional question, but like how large is the Cypherpunk community?
Boy, that's a great question. No one really knows because these are all kind of secret guys. I can tell you at the conference in Prague, there are at least a few hundred people who show up. And
Around the world?
Well, no, this is mostly local Europe, local Czechs and from Germany and, local Central Europe. But, they have to, it's not expensive, you have to pay a few bucks and you have to go and travel there and stay in a hotel and everything else, and there's several hundred people show up. So no one really knows how many there are, I don't. But I can tell you that everyone who works on Bitcoin is at least halfway cypherpunk. And so there's tens of thousands at least. Anything else?
What's your favorite sort of Bitcoin-related technology? Like you're most excited about, like OpenBazaar, Ethereum?
I'd have to say OpenBazaar. Because it allows you, it's a true decentralized market without coercion. There's no good way to use coercion in the OpenBazaar marketplace, and it is decentralized, and decentralization has huge benefits, for all mankind. It really matters a lot. So that probably would lean that way. Sorry.
So on the coin side, outside of Bitcoin, do you know anything about which cryptocurrency would be the most similar to Bitcoin? Or a lot of people are saying Dash is the next big one.
I don't stay up on that enough to really know. Sorry. There's so many things to keep track of, and that's one of them that I don't.
Yeah.
Anything else?
So, I use Coinbase, so I'm a little bit shaken by the concept of being just like another bank. But at the same time, okay, so in the 80s, I used to back up my data with floppy disks, my computer would crash, and I couldn't get it going again. Then in the 90s, I used a tape backup, computer would crash, I couldn't restore it. And then in the 2000s, I used DVDs, and that didn't work. So now I'm going to take this valuable, coin, this token, put it on a Trezor or a Nano, stick it in the safety deposit box or whatever, and then in 3 years, it's not going to work. So how do is there some, I want to use it, but I'm scared. I got to be honest with you, because I don't have a good history.
Yeah,
People have gone to junkyards to dig up the hard drive that they threw away 3 years ago because it suddenly is worth $5 million.
Right.
If you can get the data off of the hard drive or a piece of paper, and 7 years later it's still worth money,
But if I use a Trezor, what are the chances of me going to this device in like 3 years and it just not working?
It's okay. You can still. They have all kinds of safety measures for backing it up with just like 12 to 24 words that if you write down in several places and.
So even if the Trezor and the ledger goes bad, I can still recover.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Mm-hmm. Okay, I like that.
But the Trezor's like a flash drive, isn't it?
Kind of. Yeah.
More or
So
less.
what if you get static discharge on the flash drive?
I haven't heard it failing. I know two people who put it through the laundry.
Trying to
So.
Well, you do have to initialize it with your keywords,
Yeah.
right? So then you take the keywords, you put them in a safe, and if you ever lose a Trezor, it gets stolen, then you go back to that and you can recover all your stuff.
Okay.
Right. I don't remember the precise technical process, but they're very good, and they have a facility in Prague where they have people working on this stuff all the time, turning out product, and I know they consult with some of the very best people in the world on it to make their product. So I do recommend it.
I was just imagining, you got you're charged with static electricity, you touch the Trezor, and then you discharge it, and the thing fries, and you can't access it anymore. There goes your net worth.
That's a bad
Get a
day.
new one and you restore it from your keywords, yeah.
Yeah, you can always. It's amazing the backup solutions they have for it.
Yeah. All right, I think we'll probably be out of time, yeah. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.